जहाँ पे हो रहा है एक नालंदा लेक्चर फेस्टिवल 2025 जो चैतन्य कॉलेज द्वारा आए हैं और वही सारे दिखाएंगे इसमें क्या होने वाला है। ठीक है, तो ये हॉल के अंदर प्रवेश कर चुके हैं। कितना है?
And in other parts of the world also I have worked. So we have tried to create lots of applications through robotics and AI for healthcare, for education, for skill development, for service sector, for public facing application.
I'm the festival curator of Nalanda Literature Festival. सबसे पहले आज के सेशन और पूरे फेस्टिवल के चीफ गेस्ट और आज के सेशन के स्पेशल गेस्ट प्रोलिफिक स्कॉलर ऑथर पार्लियामेंटेरियन डॉक्टर शशि थरूर जी का हम स्वागत करते हैं। लेट्स वेलकम डॉक्टर शशि थरूर जी। ऑल्सो आई वेलकम द मॉडरेटर फॉर टुडेज सेशन, प्रोलिफिक वाइस चांसलर ऑफ नालंदा यूनिवर्सिटी डॉक्टर सचिन चतुर्वेदी जी। ज्यादा औपचारिकताओं में नहीं पड़ते हुए आई रिक्वेस्ट द फेस्टिवल डायरेक्टर गंगा कुमार जी के हम लोग पुष्प गुच्छ से हमारे एमिनेंट स्पीकर मॉडरेटर दोनों लोगों का स्वागत करें। And will not get into more formalities, don't worry, we'll straight away start the session. I request Smita ji and और फिर से स्वागत। Let's clap, guys.
People such challenges, minor, major, all kinds of things. Do you see any role that universities can play in that context?
Very much so, Sachin, when I call you that. Let me just say that to begin with, there's no doubt in my mind that when you look at the history of Nalanda, it literally was the world's leading university when it existed, because there wasn't very much competition, but also because it truly was an extraordinary accomplishment. Can you think back, you're looking at 1600 years ago almost, in 2 years it'll be the 1600th anniversary of the founding of this university. And in that era, to have conceived such an extraordinary multidisciplinary set of studies in one place, with all aspects having been taken care of, where the revenue of 200 villages around this area was allocated to the university so they would never be short of funds, where the students were not charged a single paise. They were simply questioned by the gatekeepers at each of the gates, and if they displayed sufficient knowledge to merit admission, they were admitted. That was the entire admission process. And when they came, they learned not just, as people initially wrongly assumed, because it was a Buddhist institution, they didn't just come here to study Buddhist scriptures. They studied everything, mathematics, astronomy, as Professor Chaturvedi said, practical sciences, including agriculture. They looked at various aspects of the interrelationship of human beings with the cosmos and with the planet. And at the same time, of course, it was organized very much as a Buddhist monastery would be. They had the world's tallest and most significant library in 9 stories tall library. Now, all of this we know because of records of people who visited at that time. Twice it was destroyed by envious marauders. Twice it was rebuilt. The third destruction, sadly, turned out to be the longest lasting, because when it was destroyed in the late 12th century by Bakhtiyar Khilji, at that time, it is said that the fires of the library and of the monastery burned for so many days, and the guide showed me yesterday you can still see some of the marks of the fire on the bricks remaining. And after all of that, it's a matter of great, great satisfaction that just about a little over 800 years after that destruction, we have been able to re-establish Nalanda University. Not on the exact site, because that is an extraordinarily, an archaeological ruin of historic interest. So that site will remain a site for the original place and for the ruins there. And it's, if you haven't, I'm sure all of you here have visited it, but for me, as someone who hadn't visited it, it was an extraordinary feeling to walk there. But having said that, Dr. Chaturvedi is quite right in bringing the conversation to the 21st century. We no longer boast any of the world's leading universities. There are various world rankings of universities in which we don't, for the longest time we didn't feature anywhere in the top 200. Now in recent years, a handful of our institutions, mainly the IITs, the Indian Institute of Science, have made it to the top 200, but not in a very high position, not in the top 10, or to the best of my recollection, not even in the top 50. So we have still a very long way to go in the world's eyes. Whereas Nalanda attracted students from as far west as Turkey and Persia, as far east as Thailand and Korea, as far north as Japan. We today are not, let's face it very honestly, a lodestar for international education. When I was at university, we had a number of foreign students from Africa and elsewhere. The number of students as a percentage of the student body has actually declined. The number of foreign students as a percentage of India's student bodies have actually declined since my days as a student. So we are losing out in the process. I mean, I can tell you with pride, meeting African presidents and prime ministers and foreign ministers during my service at the UN, who had graduated from Indian universities, and we had that in common, and it was part of our soft power that they could look back on their years studying at Delhi University or whatever and talk about it with affection. Today there are very, very, very few of those, because the next generation after that didn't come so much to India. They went to the West, or in some cases to Russia. Now, what can we do about that? You mentioned the NEP, it's very laudable. In fact, I must say that this is one bill which, unlike some of the more recent bills we've been reading about in the papers, actually did involve a lot of consultation, not in the formal process, which was unfortunate. To this day, there hasn't been a formal structured parliamentary debate on the NEP. But what happened was, when the draft bill was first written, at that point Ramesh Pokhriyal Nishank was the education minister, he circulated it to MPs, or he selected MPs and invited them to come for consultations. I think only 6 or 8 of us went, I was one of them. And after that conversation, in that larger forum, I said to him that I'd like to talk to him in greater detail. And he invited me to his office. I thought I'll get 15, 20 minutes and I'll give him some nuts and bolts. What I went thinking I'll have 15, 20 minutes turned out to be a detailed 2-hour conversation. And a number of my suggestions, concerns, questions, and objections were taken into account in the draft that came out later. So I do believe this time the government understood they were formulating a policy for the nation and not for a party or a government. And that was really, in many ways, one of the reasons why I've been, by and large, supportive of it. You framed the question in the context of whether the NEP can make Indian universities a major force in the world, and there I think we still have a long way to go. I think aspirations are very important. We should certainly have aspirations, but we need to first walk before we can run. And we do need to get a lot more of the basics right across our campuses. Still, the NEP actually is in better shape when it comes to university education, that its concepts are right the opportunity to be multidisciplinary in your studies, as you said, rightly borrows from Nalanda's approach of more than 1,000 years ago. But that is something which I think will enhance our appeal globally. We still don't have enough provision for internationalization, largely because our own domestic demand vastly outstrips supply, and particularly in many subjects like medicine and so on. I mean, I remember when I became minister in the External Affairs Ministry, the Mauritius government complaining that for many years in the 50s, 60s and 70s, you used to reserve 6 places in your medical colleges for Mauritian students. Now there are none. And I said I would look into it because help in medical education doesn't come under the HRD or now Education Ministry. But I went back to Delhi and inquired, and sure enough, they said, how can we give 6 places to foreigners when we have so many Indians who can't get in? And they're right. I mean, it's a genuine challenge. But that's why it becomes so much of a problem for us to have unrealistic international global aspirations just now. We still need to be able to meet Indian demand, maximize our supply, as it were, create more institutions, and so on. By the way, the NEP has been less successful, I think, at the school level. I know this is not the concern of this particular audience, I won't go into great detail, but a couple of issues that have been bothersome have been undoubtedly the concern about the fact that some of the more lofty aspirations of the NEP at the school level require resources, and this government is silent in where those resources are coming from. So when the Prime Minister makes a speech, very rightly saying that I want children to be able to study both music and mathematics. Okay, but in mathematics you need a blackboard and a teacher and some chalk. That most schools have, right? I certainly hope they do. But when it comes to music, you need a dedicated room or more than one. You need a whole number of instruments. Each musical instrument needs a different teacher. All that costs money. And who's going to pay for that? That's the real question which the NEP is silent on. And frankly, both when it comes to schools and colleges, and then when it comes to broader issues of research as well, we need far more resources than we are devoting currently. We've had an ambition of 3.6% of GDP for education going back to the 1960s when it was officially announced in the Kothari Commission report. Today we're still only at 2 point something. When it comes to research, by the way, we have 17% of the world's brain. Okay, but we produce just 2.7% of the world's research output. And we are somewhere like 49th or 56th or something in the rankings of patent applications filed per head of population. So we are long from being where we should be in a world leader. Part of the problem again is resources. Everything we depend on the government has finite resources. It's our taxpayers' money they're spending. But if you look at the OECD countries, 75 to 80% of the expenditure on research comes from the private sector. Whereas in India, the private sector would not spend a penny on research. They'd much rather spend it on sales and advertising and promotion and marketing. They're not interested in actually spending the resources required in research. And therefore, this has become a genuine challenge for us. And this is why I said, Sachin, that we really have a long way to go before we can ever create an institution or institutions that rival Nalanda. What Nalanda was in the world 1,200 years ago, I'm afraid we are not quite 1,200 years, I hope, but at least 20 or 30 years away from being able to create an institution that can have that kind of appeal to the world's intellectual classes.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you have raised multiple issues. Several of them can be captured for further discussion. But I was thinking to take this conversation in two different but interlinked directions. One certainly is this whole idea of preparedness of our students. One is, of course, the Indian institutions responding to the changes at the global level. But for students, how you see this changing global scenario? In your work, the less you preach, the more you learn. You have tried to bring forward this transiency that is there at the global level. You have described it in form of how the idea of stable careers, they are changing, in what way students should visualize their future, how they should see what kind of options they have. So the challenge is at two levels. One, Indian universities preparing themselves for a global route, attracting students from outside. But second is to prepare their own students for the new world which is coming up. How you see this, where resources do not matter so much. Now, as you have seen in Bangalore, in many other cities, private funded universities are multiplying. Some of them are setting very high standards.
And charging very high fees.
And charging very high fee, that's also true, but some of them are quite fair-minded. I don't want to name, but there are some very good philanthropists who are contributing to this area. Some entities under the leadership of Amitabh Kanji is here from Niti Aayog, he pushed it, and during the G20 presidency, the level of engagement of those institutions to orient our youth towards this global role. How you see your own work in terms of less you preach, the more you learn. How you see this transiency in the global scenario and our students and our youth getting prepared for the changing world?
No, look, you're quite right that there are some pretty impressive universities. One could even use the word world-class without embarrassment for some of the private institutions we have, or at least some institutions within those institutions. For example, there might be a university that has a dozen schools, of which 2 or 3 say their law school or whatever might be top class, and some of the other schools may still be having some way to go to catch up. But the truth is that has happened. I'm not disagreeing with that at all. And of course, the IITs have consistently had a worldwide reputation. Indeed, the IIT brand is now being exported. A couple of IITs have been opened abroad. So I'm not disagreeing with you that there's some of that already. But when you say, how do we prepare our children for the challenges of the world today, there are other intangibles. First of all, there is the question of scale. You know, we can't afford to have, as we've had for the longest time, a few islands of excellence in a sea of mediocrity. The truth is we have to bring the average up. We have to bring up those institutions, the central universities, the government universities, and the state universities for that matter, to that kind of standard where you know that whenever you go to any college, when you see somebody having a degree in India, a certain minimal expectation is possible. That sadly is not yet there. The other thing that we have to face is the unreadiness of our educational system for the real world of the marketplace. I remember when we were in government, we had commissioned a report from Mr. Narayana Murthy on the academia-industry interface. Perhaps my friend Amitabh can tell us why it sort of sank without trace in the following 10 years. But the arguments that he made were very valid. If you look at America today, it's a very common practice for a private company to go to a university and say, listen, we've got this idea. We don't have the people to research it. Will you assign some graduate students or whatever, the postdocs, I don't know who. We'll give you the money for them to do the research. And
इस सेशन में हम समझेंगे कि एआई और कंप्यूटर शब्द को किस तरह से समझते हैं, शब्दों के नए अर्थ किस तरह से ढूंढते हैं, और कंप्यूटर एल्गोरिथम के थ्रू आप शब्दों को कैसे समझते हैं। तो इस सेशन का जो मॉडरेटर है, मॉडरेटर अमित कुमार पांडे, जो कि रिनॉन्ड रोबोटिक और एआई साइंटिस्ट हैं, जो फ्रांस में सीटीओ के पद पर कई कंपनियों को हेड कर चुके हैं। सोफिया कंप्यूटर का जो डेवलपमेंट हुआ था उस कंपनी के भी सीटीओ थे। तो अमित कुमार पांडे जी से मैं रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा कि मंच पे आए। मैं मंच पे आमंत्रित करना चाहूंगा आदिति महेश्वरी जी को। आदिति महेश्वरी जी वाणी पब्लिकेशंस की सीईओ हैं और इन्हें कई पुरस्कार से नवाजा गया है। ये इंग्लिश लिटरेचर्स में हंसराज कॉलेज दिल्ली से एमएससी की है, फिर एमफिल टाटा इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ सोशल साइंस से की है। मैं अदिति महेश्वरी से रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा कि वो मंच पे आए। जो अगले वक्ता इसमें है प्रोफेसर लक्ष्मीधर बेहरा साहब, जो आईआईटी मंडी के डायरेक्टर हैं। Over to you, Amit ji.
ओके, हम लोग अभी 2 मिनट में शुरू करते हैं। जस्ट ये टेक्निकल प्रॉब्लम आ रहा है जिसको फिक्स किया जा रहा है अभी टेक्निकल सेशन से पहले।
The increasing kind of misunderstanding or like not believing of something, what is real, what is true, and what is false, and also increasing inequalities and increasing peaceful and more trusting society in Japan.
Thanks. So that is another perspective where we have to see that how AI and robots can bring people together instead of letting them getting apart or like segmented in different parts or kinds of societies. And that's very interesting perspective as well to see. And really there have been projects on this kind of application. One, you might be aware about autism. So children with autism, sometimes they need a different kind of therapy and engagement, and robots have been seen very useful for connecting those children with mainstream society. There have been another project in which how elderly people who are living in elderly care facility or living alone can be more connected with the rest of the world, with their family, with the society. So there have been very positive and successful societal application of robots and AI. And also in Professor Behra lab, I have seen very interesting example where robot was learning. Like you demo something that you have to pour water in the glass, and it was learning from the demonstration, and it was able to do that task for someone who is in a nursing facility and who is taking some healthcare treatment. And there is the robot which is bridging the gap between the healthcare professional and the person who is getting treated. During COVID, we have done one very interesting demo again together with Tata TCS and IIS.